What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Prime Point Show here on RotoGrinders, along with the Fantasy Points. Well, I was going to say crew, Jake, but this show, it is cursed between you and Graham being sick. Now, we did have some great people from Fantasy Points fill in while you were sick. There was electrical fire at the power station here 1 week for me that knocked me out. I was on vacation last week. Graham, there's a giant storm where Graham is. His internet just went out literally right before the show. It's cursed, but dude, we're going to have a fun show. I'm pumped after a week off, ready to talk DFS, sports betting, and ready to roll. How did Dean treat you guys? Was it okay with Dean?
Dean was great. I love Dean. I had never interacted with Dean before. I thought he was a super friendly guy. Smart. Really enjoyed chatting with him. Yeah, really smart. I loved everything about Dean.
No, I meant smart, not interacting with you. Sorry, Dean. Me and Dean are friends, so I'm just messing with that. But yeah, Dean did a great show filling in for me. If Graham's internet comes back, he's going to be joining the show. But other than that, it's just going to be me and Jake this week. Jake, let's talk like takeaways. We always do this at the start of the show here. We've got what Graham was going to talk about too. Maybe we'll expand on a couple of his thoughts as well. But what's going on in football through 7 weeks? Just a couple thoughts I have. Scoring down. Warren Sharp from Sharp Football put out an extravagant post, I think it was last week, of all the things that are going on in football on why scoring's down. It's a great thing. You can go dig it up on Twitter. And the unders this week are just, we're used to 52s, 54s, a bunch of 3 or 4 games in the 50s. And there's all teams are playing this week. And I think the highest total I saw was 47 or a 46.5 out there. Everything is so condensed. So my takeaway from both DFS, sports betting, however you want to do it, maybe more so from DFS. I like to dabble in the highest scoring game of the week markets, right, on DraftKings sometimes too. Look for games that literally could have any reason to go over and maybe target those a little bit more. I've got a couple I'll talk about later, but just general scoring is down. There's a whole bunch of reasons for it. And the unders have been very profitable. We'll see if that continues going forward. But that's just basically my takeaway. Just try to figure things out on games where the scoring might be a little bit higher than expected because they're all so condensed. Even the 49ers and the Bengals, right, with Joe Burrow back, it's like 46. Patrick Mahomes, right, going up against the Denver, horrible defense. The total's like 46.5, right? It's just the totals are so low. Try to do something a little different. Think on your own. The projections aren't going to like certain teams. I'm certainly on a couple of overs where the projections are like, Britt, what are you thinking? We'll talk about those a little bit later. But that's basically my takeaway right now.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really sharp takeaway. It's certainly made DFS a lot more interesting with the scoring being way down this year. And it'll be interesting to see how the NFL ends up reacting to this. Scoring going down continuously is not something they want for the sake of people watching these games. And it'll be interesting if they end up, pulling out any rule changes this offseason. Or anything.
Thank goodness for Taylor Swift for the ratings, right?
yeah, exactly. But my biggest takeaway right now is that Lamar Jackson is looking like the best passer in football right now. He's top 3 in catchable throw percentage, top 3 in accurate throw percentage. He's second in PFF passing grade. He's been graded as a top 4 passer by PFF in 3 of the last 4 weeks. He's completing 71% of his passes. He looks outstanding. And he's adding 9.5 rushing fantasy points per game on top of it. I think, he's plus 650 right now on DraftKings to win MVP. That seems a little low to me. Lamar's just playing absolutely out of his mind. And yeah, I think he looks better than he did in 2019.
Yeah, a little cheaper. What is he? 8,100 on DraftKings. I've got this pulled up. 8,400 Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, 8,200. So you get a little bit of a discount if you're looking at those guys, at least from an early look on DFS. And it's great too because that offense, there's a lot of condensed offenses now in the NFL.
Yeah.
The teams are just like, we have a couple, 2 or 3 really good players. Let's get them the ball. It didn't used to be like this. And it's not working for total points, but it's working for fantasy and sports betting in general. And the Baltimore's really become one of them between Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews and Lamar Jackson. You know where the ball's going, where the points are going to come from. So it makes it easy from that perspective as well. Let's touch on what Graham wanted to talk about. And I think you're going to talk about it a little bit later too, is just how Alvin Kamara, 7,300 on DraftKings this week, getting all the fantasy points in the world. We'll take a look at it through the bell cow report a little bit later in the show. But he's in the dome. It's not in New Orleans, but it's in Indianapolis. This teaser. This is a game I want to have DFS exposure to this week for a variety of reasons, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But man, this workload Kamara's having, it doesn't matter about Jamal Williams. It doesn't matter about Kendrick Miller. Kamara's the dude, and he's literally the absolute workhorse of this offense right now. How do you not want to play this guy, bet on him, use him in any way possible?
Yeah, it was super encouraging to see, Jamal Williams was active last Thursday and Kamara still dominated goal line work. He's first among all running backs in usage inside the 10-yard line. He leads the position in targets and receptions despite playing just 4 games, which is totally absurd. He's averaging more targets per game than Chris Olave, Cooper Kupp, and Jacoby Myers. The usage is absolutely insane. It's 35% better than the next closest running back right now. Kamara, extremely underpriced. I'd imagine he ends up as, if not the most popular running back of the week, I mean, certainly top 3.
He's going to have to be. There was a little coach speak, I think, I saw it earlier, where they said Jamal Williams was on a touch count for the first game back. We'll have to see. But are you really going to take Alvin Kamara off the field for Jamal Williams? Probably not, right? Outside of like an extreme goal line situation, which he did excel at last year, maybe that was more of the Lions than Jamal Williams. I still think Alvin Kamara would probably be the better choice on that. So there's a couple of takeaways we have basically on what's going on in the NFL. Let's go to our stand segment where we basically, tease you for something we're going to talk about a little later in the show. I see Jake is going to be on the side of this game that I'm talking about as well. And my stand is the books are giving way, 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 way too much credit to a team with one of the most putrid offenses I think I've seen statistically. A team that could literally be winless. They're not by a long shot, but way too much credit being given to a certain team. I'm taking the opposite side in a game for that. I'll talk about later. It's going to be my bet of the week. Jake, what's a couple stands, a couple big topics you want to talk about?
Yeah, so to me, I mean, there was one game in particular that really stood out, at least from a DFS perspective. Thanks to price, thanks to some recent trends, and that game only has the 4th highest total on the slate. So I'm not sure it's going to be quite as popular as I think it should be, and that means I'm going to want to take a big stand on it.
Yeah, so we'll get to those in just a little bit. Well, let's talk DFS. This is RotoGrinders. There's a lot of DFS stuff going on here each and every week. Look at the overview. If you are a Fantasy Point subscriber, Jake has a very, very early look article. It is up. I've read through it. Jake, since you've spent all this time, let's talk about what's going on in DFS this week. There's 13 games. There's no buys. What is the NFL doing, by the way? This is a little bit of ridiculous. I like more games is always better, right? But I don't know. They should at least be like 2 games on a buy. Maybe they're doing it. The Amazon Web Services supercomputer didn't spit out any buys this week to make everything else in the league work. I don't know what they're doing. But yeah, what's going on overall? Lots of games to choose from. Going to be a little bit more variety as well, specifically from the more games, but also all the totals, like I mentioned at the top, they're all compacted, scoring's down. How do we get ahead of that in DFS?
Yeah, I think that's an important point. The last few weeks we've seen, because of some value that opened up because of the limited slate of games, we've, sort of seen the field get pushed into particular sets, particular types of builds. This week, though, 13 games, the totals are all pretty condensed. Nothing in particular sticks out. I think you can really go any direction you want when building your lineups. I don't think, any particular build is going to be super chalky this week. But one of my biggest takeaways, which I teased in our stand segment, was, this San Francisco-Cincinnati game looks incredible from a DFS perspective. Brock Purdy's way too cheap at 5,600. He averages 19 DraftKings fantasy points per game in healthy starts across his career. That ranks 6th best among slate eligible quarterbacks. And Joe Burrow, I noted in the Week 7 show, Cincinnati's pass rate over expectation was plus 23% in Week 6. That's the highest pass rate over expectation by any game in any team this season. Burrow only 6,000. Jamar Chase, a bit more on the expensive end. But the nice thing is Burrow doubles are very cheap because T. Higgins is only 5,800. Higgins is actually the cheapest he's been in 688 days since, I believe, week 13 of 2021. So these Burrow double stacks are about as cheap as you're going to be able to get them. The San Francisco defense, isn't a great matchup for these Cincinnati wide receivers, but It's only a slightly negative matchup by schedule adjusted fantasy points per game allowed, which is what we like to use over at Fantasy Points. Beyond that, big games are going to come for Chris Olave. He's second in air yards. He's 11th in expected fantasy points per game among wide receivers. He's just way too cheap. Priced as the wide receiver 13 over on DraftKings. We also have a great tight end punt option this week. And Trey McBride, Zach Ertz was just put on IR. McBride, only 2,800. Cardinals tight ends are averaging 13 fantasy points per game. That's the 12th most among all tight end units. So I think especially from a tight end perspective, it's a very interesting week because we have all the high price guys available. Mm-hmm. We have a great punt option. And then, you could make a case for some of these guys in the 3 to 4K range. So it really is a wide open slate.
Yeah, we're going to have to see what, injury reports start showing up. We do this show if you listen on the podcast feed or you watch it later. This is a Tuesday night. There aren't even real practice reports yet. So we have no idea about injuries that might have been sustained that may or may not keep people out. But yeah, tight end, very interesting. It's going to be, you got Kelsey at the mega tier, only playable if Taylor Swift shows up in Denver. Make sure to get that report before locking him into your lineups. Hawkinson, just an absolute workhorse with Justin Jefferson out. PPR machine, plays really great. Andrews has come alive. You've got the punts too. Anyone in the middle is going to be literally no one's going to have them because I think it's a pay up or a pay down. Going to the mid tier and tight end typically just doesn't work on DraftKings too often. So yeah, from that perspective, I agree completely. A couple things I wanted to talk about were this Eagles game, right? So what I'm trying to do from DFS and sports betting, and I've got the over on the Eagles game too, is just trying to find games where you look at them and you could just see a way the game shoots out or one of the teams has a really big performance. That's very easy to do from the Philadelphia side, right? Because we have the condensed offense. It's Dallas Goedert, it's A.J. Brown, it's Devontae Smith, it's DeAndre Swift. We know where all the fantasy points are coming from on this Eagles offense. So it doesn't take, you're not going to have too many dead lineups trying to figure out what the correct combination is going to be for the week. But on the Washington side too, they're throwing the ball a ton. If Howell just doesn't get sacked, he's going to get sacked plenty. But the sacks, I don't think are the worst thing in the world because they can create a lot of garbage time at the end of the game. And Philadelphia is getting passed on quite a bit this season. So is Washington. This is a game where I think this could be 54 points total scored in this game, 60, something like that. And it just ends up being the highest scoring game of the week. We know Philadelphia can do it. Washington's had some outbursts. I think the line's a little low because they laid a dud against the Giants. I think their offense is a little bit better than that. But if they're able to fight back at all, or they're not able to fight back at all, this could be a really nice game from a fantasy perspective from the passing game because we know Washington's throwing a ton. The Eagles can get beat. The Eagles, A.J. Brown's a monster. It could always be a Devontae Smith or a Dallas Goedert game. DeAndre Swift has a big game. There's just, Jalen Hurts is, if they're down in the one, that's a touchdown. So the fantasy points are so condensed, and I think on both teams too, because Washington's they're spreading the ball around. But it's pretty easy to see McLaurin or Logan Thomas as the guys who could certainly get there. A very condensed target share for Philadelphia, Washington. I think we know where the fantasy points are going to come from. That's a game I'm on. The other one I'm looking at, I mentioned it. You're on Olave. I am too. Is this New Orleans-Indianapolis game? We saw the Colts really put it to the Browns, right? And the Browns really had no reason to be in that game. That game should have been an easy win for the Colts. But the Colts offense under Gardner Minshew, I don't know. It looks pretty good, right? And this is another team. It's a condensed offense. It's going to be Jonathan Taylor. It's going to be Michael Pittman. And it's going to be Josh Downs, who's quickly becoming one of the darlings for Gardner Minshew to throw targets to. And on the flip side, we already talked about Alvin Kamara. How do you not want 60 yards rushing, 400 targets, a good chance at a touchdown, right? Like he's an amazing play. But then you like Olave. I like Olave. Could Derek Carr have a ceiling game? This might be the first of his career, but give me 24, 25 fantasy points. That's all it really takes if Olave is getting 15 targets again, right? Like it's very easy to see where the ball is going. It's in a dome. You don't have to worry about weather. None of this nonsense. No wind, no rain. It's not the worst weather right now, but there's going to be some wind. It looks like it's Tuesday. Who knows where the wind's blowing, but it looks like there could be a couple of windy games. You don't have to worry about that. And with the totals all condensed, the ownership, the projections, everything, no one's going to be on this game outside of Kamara and probably Jonathan Taylor because they're too cheap. Flip it over, go to the passing game, hope it shoots out. Those are a couple thoughts I have early in the week. And I think you definitely have to be on this New Orleans, Indianapolis one, BJ.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I think, it's important to note Indianapolis runs single high coverage at the league's highest rate by far. Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, those are guys that cook single high coverage because they're such amazing deep threats. You get one-on-one coverage on the outside when there's only one deep safety. So yeah, I love both his plays. I think Shaheed's probably going to go notably under-owned here. People seem to forget about his, single game upside. He's a 40-yard touchdown machine. So yeah, I really like that game from a DFS perspective. I think that's a great call.
Yeah, Graham, still not back. If his internet comes back, he's welcome to join the show. But it looks like he wanted to talk about the running back position. Now, the running back position is pretty, I don't want to say funky, but right, you've got Alvin Kamara, who's probably mispriced by like $1,000. Bijan Robinson's down here against Tennessee at $6K. Maybe he's pretty interesting. You've got Breece Hall, Pacheco. Mixon is just like the most inefficient running back in the league. I don't know if he has like no juice anymore, which I think that further solidifies the passing game of the Bengals, and they're going to let Joe Burrow cook. But these mid-price running backs between, I guess I'll sort by salary, between Breece Hall, right, who's what, 5,900 going up against the Giants, who's you got to think he's going to basically take complete control of this backfield now. Jonathan Taylor still splitting the carries with Zach Moss, but the snaps are going to continue to go in his favor against New Orleans in the game that we like here. You've got Bijan, Pacheco, probably not mixed in against the 49ers defense. Graham wanted to talk about these. Do you have a favorite of these guys that you would be targeting?
Yeah, to me, Breece Hall really stands out. He's obviously been playing incredible. He's fifth in his rate of runs to go 15 or more yards. He's third in yards after contact per attempt, and he's sixth in fantasy points over expectation. You combine that with season highs in snap share, route share, and target share in week 6, plus a bye. I mean, it's easy to see a massive workload here. And this is the rare game where the Jets are actually favored. They're expected to win. Why would you put the ball in Zach Wilson's hands when you are faced with positive game script? Just feed Breece Hall. So yeah, I think Breece Hall is certainly the most, at least I think most objective value of that group. But Bijan Robinson at 6K is really interesting. I mean, obviously Tennessee, a brutal run matchup, but Bijan's work in the pass game has been outstanding this year. Obviously, minus on Sunday when he had the flu. But yeah, I think, 6K Bijan is always pretty tempting, just given the talent, and a 70% snap share in the Atlanta backfield.
You have Kareem Hunt getting a lot of work. Najee Harris, 51. DraftKings Finder was like, you stink, Najee Harris, but does he stink?
Well, yeah. So that's sort of an interesting topic because Najee Harris was bottom 10 among, I believe, 70 qualifiers in explosive run rate last year. This year, he's top 10 in explosive run rate. So he is playing a little better. One of our film experts said that he lost a little bit of weight, looks more explosive. At the same time, it is still a pretty gross split between him and Jaylen Warren. So, I'm not sure you're necessarily getting there when, Hunt at 5,200, assuming Jerome Ford is out, Javonte Williams at 5,200, looks like a pretty solid play as well. I know that you could make a case for a guy like Amari DiMercado at 4,800 after, he saw a pretty solid workload last week. So, yeah, I mean, Najee Harris probably doesn't stink, but I also don't really see how you're going to end up playing him in DFS this week.
Yeah, just lots of little. I wish I knew I want to know what's the snap share for the Houston running backs against Carolina this week. Because if you were to tell me, hey, did Singletary, after Dameon Pierce was getting all the work for a couple games in a row, Singletary pops up, mainly probably because Dameon Pierce hasn't been very good with his touches, and they go to a timeshare. I just want one of these guys to have a really big game against Carolina. It seems like it's there for the taking, but if it's the dreaded 50-50 split, that can be pretty tough.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably going to lean closer to Singletary. He was at 31 snaps on Sunday. Last time they played, Dameon Pierce at 21 snaps. Personally, I'm probably going to lean more into the passing game here. I've loved what I've seen from CJ Stroud and these Texans wide receivers. This is a fantastic matchup for Nico Collins. He averages 5.1 yards per route run against single high defenses which the Panthers play at a top 8 rate. So yeah, I'll be leaning into the pass game here. I don't think you're going to end up on Dameon Pierce, who's averaging just 2.9 yards per carry this season, which is pretty shocking considering that, he was a good prospect and looked pretty good as a rookie.
Projections early, it's Tuesday, right? No, we haven't. The guys that run the projections, I don't think the blitz has been updated yet. The RotoGrinders team, they do a first glance over, but the Nico Collins call sounds pretty good, and I don't think too many people will be on him this week. All right, we'll get into some screen sharing and some bets in just a little bit, but first I have to tell you about our friends over at Ticketmaster. More memories are made when you're there for live NFL action, and when you need tickets, Ticketmaster's got you covered. As the official marketplace of the NFL, Ticketmaster gives you more ways to find your perfect seat. Their interactive seat map gives you 360-degree previews of your section to make sure you have the best view of those pivotal plays. And if your plans change, Ticketmaster gives you more flexibility to sell or transfer your tickets. Plus, mobile tickets make getting in on game day a breeze, and you can even customize your Ticketmaster app to rep your team's colors. Find tickets today at Ticketmaster.com/NFL. All right, Jake, let's go to the bell cow report on fantasypoints.com. Let's take a look at what's been happening on the season. Let's take a look at what happened last week. Let's see. We just spent a little bit of time talking about running backs. Does the data back up what, the eyes, all of that? Tell us about what's going on the field right now.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just absolutely absurd seeing Alvin Kamara at 25.9 expected fantasy points per game. One of the best workloads we've seen of the last decade, if it ends up holding up, 35% better than Tony Pollard, than Christian McCaffrey. Beyond that, I wanted to look at week 7 to see, recent usage, because I do think there are some interesting notes from this past week. Of course, Alvin Kamara leading the way once again at 36.3 expected fantasy points per game. If you look at, the top games overall by expected fantasy points, Alvin Kamara has 2 of the top 10, 4 of the top 25. He's only played 4 games. And, there have been a lot more running back games than that across the board. So, Deontay Foreman, I think is really interesting, just given that he played so well on Sunday. It'll be interesting to see if he can end up commanding more of a role once Roschon Johnson comes back. Because we saw, Foreman was a healthy scratch in games that Roschon Johnson played. But, after he, just absolutely crushed on Sunday, I would expect at least some, significantly more involved, or some more involved, more work, for Foreman. Jahmyr Gibbs, again, with a super strong workload. I know people were a little worried about Craig Reynolds potentially being involved, but no, Jahmyr Gibbs is dominating that backfield. And then Jonathan Taylor, I think, this is pretty important here. He split snaps 50-50 with Zach Moss, but it was a 65-35 split in favor of Taylor in regards to expected fantasy points. Again, that's why we rely so heavily on expected fantasy points. And then Britt, I'm curious if you have any takes on this Rams backfield. Darrell Henderson handled, all the work inside the 10, handled the majority of backfield expected fantasy points, but, he's also not very good. Royce Freeman is hanging around. Is Darrell Henderson a guy that we're going to want to be on as the season moves forward?
Maybe forward for future weeks, but probably not this week against the Cowboys. Too much uncertainty, unless McVay's pretty good with the coach speak. He when he says something, you have to take note of it. And he basically told us what was going to happen. The first words out of his mouth all week, well, Darrell Henderson and Royce Freeman were going to split work, with Henderson generally being the first person mentioned. That's pretty much what it ended up being. Henderson had a good game. There's no reason to not play him. He's not very good. I wish Royce Freeman wasn't getting so much work. You never really know what they're going to do. Who do they got? Gaskin and Evans in there too. Are they going to bring one of these guys to give him more work? Always a little tough. The Cowboys matchup, I think I'm going to take a pass on that Rams situation.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough spot. And then beyond that, I mean, Javonte Williams, with a pretty solid workload, his efficiency has picked up a bit. 5,200, I think he's interesting from a DFS perspective this week. Emery DeMercado kind of shocked with, an 80% snap share, 13.3 expected fantasy points. He's also interesting in DFS at just 4,800. I know we mentioned him a little earlier. But yeah, that's part of what makes the Bell Cow report so amazing, is you can just go in, sort by snaps, sort by expected fantasy points per game, and, get a great view of, exactly what running back usage looked like in week 7 for the season, for whatever length of time you want to see. So that's why we rely so heavily on the Bell Cow report here at Fantasy Points.
Yeah, there's a million things you can do. The best data tool, if you're a serious fantasy football player, sports bettor, checking out anything you can do on the data tool on fantasy points is an absolute must-have. Basically, the only thing I literally use for my own research anymore is the data tool on fantasy points. You don't need anything else. It's got everything you need.
Yeah, it's awesome how granular you can get with the tools. Like I've loved doing research for Showdown, looking at single high splits, two high splits, man coverage versus zone coverage stuff. For Showdown, you really can't find that stuff anywhere else. And, it really pays to be able to filter things down and, just dive in extremely deep for slates where the edges are, very small.
All right, let's get to some sports betting. We've got some fantasy pick'em as well. I like some underdog plays that I think I've mentioned most of them, but we'll get to them in a little bit here. But let's talk about my bet of the week. This is what and you're on it too, I see, is a team. I'm going against the team that I think is just completely overrated, and that is the Pittsburgh Steelers. They stink. They literally could be 0-6. They beat the Raiders, was basically the only game where they won. It wasn't by a ton. But let me pull up on scores and odds some of the stuff that's gone on with them this year. So they're 4-2. They beat that. Remember that game against the Browns? They literally had no reason to win that game, but they did. They got a couple of defensive touchdowns. Deshaun Watson fumble. Their defense, the Steelers' defense is good, but Tomlin has this wizardry to just make the other team do stupid crap all the time. Maybe you have to give the Steelers credit for it, but man, I think sometimes the luck has to run out on, and that's what I'm betting on this week. They beat the Ravens. They literally had no reason. The Ravens gave that game away to the Steelers again. The Mike Tomlin wizardry, a couple of bad turnovers and key spots. They were able to beat the Ravens. They beat the Rams last week. The Rams missed 2 field goals and an extra point. That's the 7 points right there. I think Cooper Kupp dropped some big passes. It's just a lot of weird stuff is going on in these Steelers wins. And the Jaguars, I got them yesterday. So on Monday at -1.5, I wrote it up on scores and odds. It's now 2.5. You can get the 2.5 is fine. Once it gets to 3, maybe I'd waver a little bit, but I'm still very strong in them at -2.5. The Jaguars look good. The Steelers literally have some of the worst offensive play in the league. They get no offense. Kenny Pickett's 30th in QBR. Steelers second lowest yards per game. It's just the Jaguars could win this by a mile. I might ladder it up too, take some big alt totals. I think I checked the weather. It doesn't look too bad. But yeah, the Jaguars, you're on it too. Anything else you want to add? This is my bet of the week. It says 1 unit on here, but I think I bet 1 unit maybe 5 times already.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I mean, it's Trevor Lawrence versus Kenny Pickett, and you're only getting 2.5 points. I think I'll take that every time.
Yeah, that's a good one. What are a couple other good things you're on this week?
Yeah, I was looking at the Jets -2.5 against the Giants. It's -110 over at PointsBet. So Zach Wilson is actually going through what is the best 3-game stretch of his career, according to PFF passing grades. It's not saying much. I mean, it is Zach Wilson, but it's at least a little encouraging that he's playing better. Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed likely return from concussion protocol this week, which is obviously huge for a Jets defense that relies very heavily on their star corners. But most importantly, I mean, New York Giants can't do anything. And Breece Hall's coming on as a probably the best running back in the NFL, at least top 3. He looks awesome. So yeah, I just think the Jets are a notably better team here. This probably closes at -3. I love getting -2.5 at -110 over at
a couple. There was a bet I was on. Let me just see here if I still have it on here. The Vikings was one. I got them at +1 today against the Packers, and every other book had them at -1 or a pick 'em. So being able to pick out the 1 or 2 lines where you could still get the -2.5 to a 3, that is a big thing in NFL to be able to get that. So if you're going to get the Jets, make sure you get that 2.5. Absolutely. I haven't bet that personally, but that looks like one I might follow you in on. That makes a lot of sense. A couple other ones I'm on. Let's see. We're going to go the good old Wong teaser. We all love the Wong teaser. We're going to take the Chiefs and the Ravens. I know you talked a lot about Lamar Jackson being amazing. Kyler Murray ain't coming back for this one. The Cardinals, I don't think they have a chance in this game against Baltimore. I think Baltimore just rolls them. And the Chiefs, they don't have to lose, but they're going to be able to beat the Broncos by more than 2 points. I think you can even get it at 7.5 at some places. Let me see. where is this at? But basically, if they're both at 8, you take the 6-point teaser. You get it minus 120 on DraftKings, and basically they each have to win by 2. I think these are blowout victories for both teams. The Broncos have no offense, and I don't know. I don't really. They definitely don't have any defense. They've held a couple low-scoring games recently, but I think that's much more of a mirage than reality. So that the 6-point teaser, Chiefs Ravens, is one I'm on. I got a couple other ones. Let's see here. Oh yeah, Philadelphia Washington over 43.5. I like that for DFS. I would say the Eagles last year probably could have hit the 43.5 on their own in this game. Maybe this year they only get to like 35. But I think Washington, they're going to throw. You can pass on the Eagles. I think there's a lot of ways for this game to go over, whether it be garbage time or whether it be a reasonably competitive game. So those are the 3 I'm on. We've got the Jaguars minus 2.5, the 6-point teaser, Chiefs, Ravens, and then Philadelphia, Washington over 43.5. It looks like Graham was on the under New England, Miami game at under 47. His notes here with a healthy Tua, both of these last 2 games, 41 and 27 total points. The Bill Belichick wizardry, I don't know. Could it be there? I think there's going to be some wind in this game too. I was looking at the early weather. This looks like one of the most impacted weather games of the week. Never want to see wind, if you're trying to throw to Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, some of these other guys. We'll have to see how that plays out. But what do you think Graham's take on the under there?
Yeah, I really like that. So something that I spent a good amount of time on today was just looking at how the Dolphins had fared against New England, how specifically Tua and Tyreek Hill had fared against New England, and they'd really been shut down. And I was talking to one of our film guys, one of the guys who does all the charting that ends up in the data suite over at Fantasy Points, and he said that Tua really struggles with teams that disguise coverage, and the Patriots are one of the best teams at disguising their coverage. I mean, you look at Tyreek Hill's splits in like division versus outside the division, or even just against New England since he joined Miami. He hasn't scored more than 18 DraftKings points in a game. Miami generally has leaned on their rushing attack against New England. So I do think this is, Miami's team total might make a lot of people think this is a spot to attack for DFS. And of course, with how explosive they are, you could certainly argue that it is. But I do think New England is, arguably the toughest matchup for the Dolphins overall, even without star cornerback Christian Gonzalez.
What are you buying into? Are you buying into the Patriots being or the Bills being What happened in that Bills-Patriots game?
Oh man, I mean, I just think it's the NFL. I think I think some of these offenses, even the ones that are complete disasters, can still have bright spots, and that's what we saw from New England last week. I mean, man, I don't have a lot of faith in them going forward outside of the defensive side of the ball, but yeah, at least for the purposes of the under in their game against Miami, I can certainly see where Graham's coming from.
Yeah, lots of games to choose from. All the totals still there. Let's hope all of our bets come out on the good end for us this week. Let's go and end the show with some fantasy pick'em. So I'll go first. I don't know if I stole some of the ones you were looking at, but this is an underdog play. So first, we're going with the Derek Carr, Chris Olave combination, right? Anytime you can get when you're playing the fantasy pick'em, underdog price picks, or the millions of other ones that are out there, and you're allowed to correlate without getting a reduction in your payout, you should be doing that. So we're going to go ahead and do that. We're in a dome. You can score on the Colts. And I think the Colts offense might be able to push the Saints a little bit here. And we're going to pray that Derek Carr doesn't check down to Alvin Kamara 20 times, maybe just 12, right? Because we're going to use Kamara on DFS. And the rest go to Chris Olave because his line or his number was 62.5 right before the show here. I think that's a little bit too low. He's another absolute target monster right now in this offense. It's becoming very condensed. They know Olave is an extreme talent. Get him the football. That's what they're doing. And Derek Carr in the dome might be able to get that done. So that's a nice correlation. And Breece Hall, so underdog will put these out on like Monday afternoon, and he was at 62.5. And I went nuts on that. It's at 65.5 now. I'm still okay with that. I'm sticking with him against the Giants. Breece Hall takeover of the Jets offense is here. It starts this week against the Giants. Big game, 100 plus yards for Breece Hall. And they're just putting it at 65.5 before the sports books even had it out. So there's a little 3-pick for me. What are you looking at, Jake?
Yeah, so I spent a good chunk of the show talking about how great Lamar's played, and he's faced with a top 3 matchup this week. So why wouldn't we take the over 229.5 passing yards? Can get a little correlation there with Mark Andrews over 57.5 receiving yards. The Bengals are throwing the ball a ton again, and of course, I want Joe Burrow over 260.5 passing yards. A little more correlation with Jamar Chase over 82.5 receiving yards. Really do think Cincinnati's going to lead the league in pass rate over expectation from this point forward. And then Travis Kelce, I think this is one of the most mispriced lines on the board right now. 81.5 receiving yards. I love the over there. He's in the best possible matchup against Denver. There isn't a weaker defense, schedule adjusted, against tight ends this season. I think, his receiving prop line is probably going to close a lot closer to 90. Really love his overs this week.
We got to get the taglines, or what do they call it on a plane? We got to see if Taylor Swift's private jet is going to Denver this weekend, because there's some I think it's all nonsense, but there's like random splits with her at the game, not at the game, et cetera, et cetera. Really doesn't have anything to do with it, but it's fun to talk about.
I think what it is like, it's just so happened that, her being at games has lined up with the games where he's been fully healthy, and the games where, he struggled with injury a little more were just happened to be the games that she missed. So maybe there is something to it. I have no idea, but either way, even if she isn't going to be there, I'm still betting Kelce overs.
All right. So apologies from Graham on not being able to make it. I swear one of these days, again, we started off the season, a couple shows in a row. We've had a couple strange occurrences, but let's pray next week Graham's internet doesn't knock out, right? There's no fires for me to lose power. There's no sickness. There's no emergencies, and we're able to come back and have a full Prime Points show with you and Graham. But Jake, anyway, it's been fun talking to you. Any final thoughts before we get on out of here?
No, this has been great. Really love the 2-man show, and I'm excited for hopefully the return of the 3-man show in week 9.
Yeah, go check out everything over on Fantasy Points. Jake's early week articles up, and the data tool, absolutely amazing. Make sure to tune in to the RotoGrinders podcast feed, YouTube, for all the shows, ownership as the week progresses. Lots of fun stuff coming your way at RotoGrinders. Other than that, have a good week, everybody. I'm Britt. He's Jake. Thanks for watching, and we out you.